that are dying of cancer every year. Okay, now if you add diabetic deaths, if you add AIDS, if you have retrovirus deaths per year, if you add the autoimmune diseases, and then you include abortions, you're looking at a Hitler Holocaust being done every single year in this country, and the media doesn't even report it. But yet they'll report 9/11 with 3,000 deaths, and they'll continue to report that thing for 2 years. So that's showing you that there's media control, and it gets back to these global elitists again. Okay? Every single disease process stems in the body at the cell level, not at the organ level or not at the system level. The reason why medicine, mainstream medicine, has no answers, and they never will until they do a paradigm shift, is because their treatment modalities, they actually treat you on a system level and never at the cell level. For instance, when you have a headache, or you have an angina pain, or you have a flatulence like a bloating in your stomach, that is not the problem. That is a warning signal of a disease process at the cellular level in a specific organ. If you have a headache, that is not a ibuprofen or a codeine deficiency. That's not what your body's not telling you have a drug deficiency. If you have an angina pain, that's not your body telling you have nitroglycerin deficiencies. Okay, there's a problem there. So I'm going to bring you in the eyes of an MD. When you're a hungry up-and-coming physician and you're sitting in the audience or sitting in a classroom listening to a lecture of a professor, this professor is actually telling these medical students that the symptoms are the disease, and that you either drug it, you cut it, you burn it, you poison it. You drug it, you cut it, you burn it, you poison it. And what's happening is they're using suppressive meds for the symptom, and they're never or cutting out the body part on an outside system level, but they're never getting to the actual cause of the disease process at the cellular level. So they're leaving the disease process there. The danger to that is you can't feel the headache no more because they knocked it out. You cannot feel the angina pain no more because they knocked it out with nitroglycerin. You cannot feel the stomach problems no more because they used the antacid in order to block the symptoms, and then the disease end up getting chronically deep to the point where 6 months later, that angina pain is not being felt, and this patient thinks after taking the nitroglycerin under the tongue, they just cured the disease of the angina pain, and in reality, they still have an atherosclerotic plaque buildup in and around the heart, and then all of a sudden, 6 to 8 months later, they wake up with a heart attack. If they live through that heart attack, they're strapped to a gurney with a $30,000, $40,000 triple bypass or a quad. So they hit you on the front end with suppressive meds to knock out the symptoms so you don't feel it no more, making the patient think they're getting well. And then a year later, they end up waking up with a heart attack or a stroke, and they don't correlate. The patients are not correlating what happened here with the medications and what they did over here. And this includes cancer. You know, they use chemotherapy and radiation to burn, drug, cut the tumor, but the tumor is a side effect of cancer process. They're two separate entities, and doctors are taught they are one and the same. So their so-called focus is, well, if we remove the tumor, we somehow cured the cancer. So they cut or radiate or burn the tumor, and if they leave one cell in that body, that cell incubates back to another tumor in the same spot, or the cellular environment is still in a cancer process because they didn't change anything. They made it worse through the poisonous chemo, and then pretty soon they're manifesting another tumor site a year later or 2 years later for secondary tumors that are popping up from the initial treatments over here. So I call it illusionary medicine. It's David Copperfield medicine. All they're doing is they're playing the magical shell game. You start out with one disease, and then you got another one, and then you got another one. And then the medications are a disease in and of itself. And I'm going to repeat that. A pharmaceutical is a disease in and of itself. When you get a side effect, that is a direct effect. Okay? You have side effects that are a disease. If you have a problem, let's say a stomach disorder, and you take something for the gut, like an analgesic or an anticortical steroid or an antacid, and it causes a headache, the drug caused another disease. The headache is another disease. Okay? If you take another medication and you get depression from it, you just created another disease. So and I want to share this with you, that I do stack up with medicine on this aspect, that they are the best in the world when it comes to trauma or crisis care, and that's where they should be. But the problem when I step my foot down is they're using trauma medicine for toenail aches. They're using trauma medicine for the common cold. They're using trauma medicine for diabetes. They're using trauma medicine for arthritis. They're using trauma medicine for every single disease process known to man, and it only works in trauma situations to buy you time until you can fix the problem of the disease process, okay? So hopefully that helps you understand why medicine, because they're looking in the wrong direction, are not having any answers. And they never will until they switch gears, until they get a paradigm shift to more natural, non-toxic, non-invasive treatment modalities instead of these expensive, invasive, destructive, and dangerous methods of treatment. Let's start with the cell. I want to kind of bring you into the creation room called the womb that actually births the human being. And you need to understand conception, and you need to understand how the body's formed before you really understand disease process. And with the cell, if you understand cell process, and I'm going to show how that links to every disease known to man, then you'll understand the treatment modalities to incorporate. You have a live sperm that conceives with a live egg. You have conception called a zygote. You start out with one cell, and that one cell has information, DNA, chromatic information, to make a whole body by itself, that one cell. It splits like a copy machine, templates out, and now you have two cells that know how to make a whole body. Then you have 4 cells that know how to make a whole body. Then you have 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. That's exponential growth. And it eventually becomes what's called a raspberry cluster. It's about a billion-cell cluster. And at that point, these cells break off, and they start forming on their own intelligence. They start forming the spinal cord. They start forming the mandible, the top half of the spine. They start forming the heart. They start forming the intestinal tract. And the brain is not manifested until the 3rd month of gestation, which means that these cells have a nucleic brain that know how to break off and form organs on their own before the brain is actually made. And that right there shatters evolution, because they tell you we're an accidental mutation that comes from some primordial soup, from random chance, when there's intelligence in all 75 trillion cells. And I'm going to say that again. The human body is made up of 75 less or more, depending on the size of the body, about 75 trillion. That's like taking everybody on this planet and timesing it by 15,000. And that's how many cells that you have in your body that make up your bone, that make up your skin, that make up the muscle structures, that make up your hair, make up your eyes, and so forth. The cells are like miniature factories of pharmaceutical factories. Every single cell has a job to do in the 75 trillion. An analogous of these cells with the planet, like take 6 billion people, times it by 15,000, and picture everybody picking up a cell phone, a cellular phone that's wireless, and making a call. Now picture 75 trillion cellular phones in your body picking up their phone, wireless, and sending a message to another cell, whether it's a neighboring cell or whether it's a distant cell through the blood. So that correlation there is, if you picture everybody on the earth doing that, and then picture everyone clicking on three-way, okay, 6 billion people talking three-way wireless, and then picture everyone hitting conference call, where they're having the capability of 1,000 different conversations on their phone, 6 billion of them, and then times that by about 15,000, and that's the complexity of the actual transmission and receiving of messages that these cells do 24 hours a day without you knowing it while you're sleeping, okay? That is intelligence. There's a driving force that is that intelligence, and what the driving force is the driving force is the subatomic particles that go behind the cell, okay, are your protons, neutrons, your quarks, neutrinos, and science, out of ignorance, are trying to find the smallest particle form that makes up the body, and what they're going to find is nothing after they keep splitting these atoms in particle accelerators. They're going to find a smaller one, then a quark. Then they're going to find a smaller one than that. And they're going to keep finding it till it's nothing but intelligence, and that's what they're going to find. I'm going to share with you some prophecy that's all they're going to find is God's intelligence if they keep doing that. And, okay, and then they spend trillions of dollars in the past 50, 60 years in scientific endeavors to try to figure that out, okay? So the driving force between the 75 trillion cells is God himself. And then the subatomic particles form molecular structures. And then the molecules form the actual cell. The cell is made up of 4 different structures: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen, and combinations of. When you hear the word carbohydrate, carbon-hydrate, hydrate water, carbon, C, okay? When you mix the 4 molecules, you get proteins, amino acid structures, and then you mix and get them, you get fats also. So everything that's a structure of the body, from muscle to fat cells to the brain, is actually made of the 4 molecular structures in combinations. So hopefully in a simple way, I didn't want to get too technical, you understand that the cells make up tissues if they're healthy. If the tissues make up the organs make up the systems, like the endocrine system or the neurological system. And then the systems make up the body organism. When the cells are contaminated by refined processed foods, contaminated environment, contaminated beverages, what you're bathing in, and on, then the blood becomes a river of death and disease instead of a river of life, through what you're swallowing, what you're breathing, and what you're bathing in, and what you're drinking. So the blood becomes a vector, basically a delivery for this toxic sludge, and it starts delivering the toxins to the 75 trillion cells that make up your organs and systems. So you can picture what happens when that cell is bathing in toxic sewage, and the cell cannot respirate, just like me and you respirate oxygen and nutrients, and then we have an exhaust system of spitting out CO2. These cells actually breathe like a lung, O2, oxygen, and nutrient, and they spit out what? They spit out CO2, lactic acids, the carbonic acids, as a waste product. And then if you have a healthy system, the blood picks it back up, the waste, and carries it out one of the sewage systems, the colon, the urinary tract, the skin, or through respiration as a waste. That's in a healthy individual. The problem with Americans is they're eating refined processed foods 3 times a day and conveniency foods. They're taking in 100,000 contaminants in their atmosphere every time they take a breath, especially in the major cities. Unless you're living in the backwoods of Idaho or the backwoods of Montana, or you have a gas mask 24 hours a day, you are exposed to around 100,000 different environmental contaminants. You have fossil fuels, you got fluorocarbons, you have industrial contaminants, you have pesticides, insecticides, you have asbestos, and on it goes in the environmental realm. Then you have your home contaminants. Most people don't even clean their air conditioner, and as far as the filters. And the chemicals involved in cleaning, like your 409 and your toothpaste with fluoride in it, and then you have your aluminum and your antiperspirants. And you combine the environmental factors of the 100,000 plus the household, plus the work contaminants of being in the office. And there's a syndrome which I run into a lot as a practitioner called the sick building syndrome. And there's a lot of chemical constituents that are in a workplace for 9 hours a day, stagnant air, no circulation, that you're breathing, and this all gets into the blood. And tonight you're going to hear me saying blood cell, blood cell, blood cell, because the vector or the delivery system, like a river, is to the cell structures by lymphatic flow and by the blood. So when the blood becomes contaminated, you become contaminated at a macro level as opposed to the micro level. The micro contamination of the cell creates a macro contamination at the system or the body level. And that's what disease is. In a nutshell, all the disease is a stagnation of these toxins that have not been filtered fast enough by the skin, or by the liver filter, by the kidney filter, by the colon through bowel movement, through the bladder, through urination. God built into us exhaust systems to dump excess carcinogens and toxins and toxic byproducts. The problem with most Americans is the total toxic burden on their systems supersedes 500,000 chemicals when you combine environmental poison, food contaminants, preservatives, additives, emulsifiers, stabilizers. There's so many chemicals on these boxes in conventional stores, you can't even pronounce them, let alone digest them. Okay? Now you can imagine what these chemicals are doing to your immune system, to your liver, to your cellular structures. BHA, BHT, benzoate, caramel coloring, yellow number 5 dyes. God made us to where we have an immune system that recognizes self from non-self. And getting back to what I explained to you, the building material of the human body is organic, live substances coming from plant. And that's where you get your carbons and oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen. When you stick synthetic concoctions into you of carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen synthetically through, I call them Frankenstein laboratory, Frankenstein foods, you end up poisoning the blood through the digestive route. If you're breathing contaminants that are synthetic, chemicals, it comes in through the respiratory tract into the blood. And eventually the blood loads up with so many carcinogens and so many toxins that it has no choice but to dump the excess carcinogens and toxins into weak links of your body. Everybody has a predisposition for a weak organ or a weak system, and that is where you're going to have the slapped-on disease label that medical science gives you when you get sick. For example, if someone is prone for pancreatic cancer, or let's say diabetes, their target organ is going to be the pancreas. So what happens is you have the 100,000 plus chemicals coming in from the air, and you have the other 20,000 in food contaminants per day, and then you have another 10, 15,000 coming in through beverage contaminants like your Cokes and Dr. Peppers and alcohol and coffee and so forth. And then you have your other contaminants that, I mean, I could be here all night, pharmaceuticals, you have stagnant air in an airplane, you know, you have perfumes and you have colognes and on and on it goes, because these chemicals, again, the body recognizes self from non-self. So the body looks at these chemicals and says, okay, what is in this thing that is a makeup of my body structure, my body cells? If it is not a fruit, if it's not a vegetable, if it is not a nut or a grain or a seed, or if it's not water, or if it's not sunshine, or if it's not some type of oxygen molecule, that body looks at that thing and says, that BHA and the BHT and the sodium benzoate and yellow number 5 dyes, I cannot utilize. It's poison to me. So it kicks up an adaptation response to try to either bond it and get rid of it, or gear up the immune system, or gear up the liver and the kidneys to filter the garbage to get the stuff out of the body, and it taxes your systems. It actually robs life force every time you do that from you, slowly. You know, Satan knows if he can take you out in a subtle way slowly with the refined processed foods and the devitalized toxic-laden foods, he's got you in a slow death, and you wake up one day at 53 not knowing it with a heart attack, a stroke, an aneurysm, cardiovascular disease, and he just took 20, 30 years out of your life without you knowing it. And so, you know, my heart's in it today to help you give some golden nuggets of information. I don't want you to be a statistic to these global elitists who are trying to take out 80% of the population. I mean, my heart's in it to try to hope that you can grasp something here, to be able to use it to help either you or help a coworker or help a family member, not be a statistic where 8 out of 10 of you will be eventually suffering from some disease. You know, the good news is 2 out of 10 of you will escape these Illuminati landmines and be able to have a death from, you know, old age as opposed to a sickness or a disease process. I mean, if you look at most people when they die of a disease. Most of them, 9 out of 10. And that's sad. Whereas 50 years ago, before the chemical combine industry of IG Farben, and you have Rockefellers and Rothschilds and so forth, they sit there and they poison the atmosphere, they poison our waters, they poison our food, they poison our beverages, and that's for a reason. There's an agenda. It's not accidental. And they know that if they can contaminate your blood through what you breathe, what you eat, what you drink, and what you bathe in, they've got you. Because the blood, what? The blood is a river of death and disease. It's not a river of life anymore. So that river of death and disease through the blood, and especially if the blood is not moving through stagnation and that's sedentary lifestyles, because you're not pumping the lymphs, that blood's delivering this sludge to weak links of your body. These are the dead zones. When these toxins accumulate in the organs or tissues, that's the fancy name medical science gives the disease process. Again, if you're prone for a pancreatic weakness, take your pick. You're either going to get pancreatic cancer or you're going to get diabetes. The reason for that is you have what's called beta cells that actually manufacture insulin, and they regulate blood sugar. If these billions of beta cells are suffocating or coated in these toxic residues that are not being filtered fast enough, they clog the receptor sites of the insulin receptors, and they can't regulate blood sugar. Well, what's the fancy name medical science will give that disease? Diabetes mellitus, okay? If you're prone for joint storage, because your joints are the weakness, and your synovial fluid cells are coated with the toxic sludge in the joints, and you cannot produce synovial fluid, and you get an immune response to clean up the mess and spilling of histamines, what's the fancy name they give that? rheumatoid arthritis. If the toxins collect in the myelin sheaths of the nerves, and these calcium deposits collect with carbonic acids and phosphoric acids, and collect around the myelin sheaths, what's the fancy name they give that? Multiple sclerosis. If the toxins collect in the heart and lung tissue, okay, let's say it's the lung tissue, take your pick. They're either going to cause a vasoconstriction to the bronchi tubes, causing asthma. If the allergens or these toxins irritate the lining and cause a swelling of the bronchi tubes in the lung, you're going to get bronchitis. If the toxins are so accumulative in the lower part of the lung that God's way of getting rid of the mess is a trapping like a spider web of mucus secretions to trap the bacteria, trap the toxins or the viral forms, to cough it out, and you're not doing that, and it infects because of the bacterial invasion. The fancy name is pneumonia. If the toxins collect in the brain, and it all depends on the area of the brain, you're going to take your pick. You'll get Alzheimer's, you'll get Parkinson's, you'll get some type of dementia type disease. These are fancy labels, people, that are put on a weak link or a dead zone, electromagnetic dead zone, that you have genetically predisposed from mom and dad, from the genes. But it doesn't mean that you'll get that. It's only when the toxic residues supersede the filtration systems, okay? And I'm going to say that again. The only time you're going to get sick is if you have more toxic accumulation of carcinogens that enter the blood that are more than what the liver, the kidneys, the skin, the colon, the urinary tract, and respiration can dump. Okay, it's that simple. Okay, but here's the good news: if you can clean out your liver and you can clean up your kidneys and clean up the blood, and I'm going to get into those protocols later on, and you can open up the evacuation routes faster, your colon, your urinary tract, through hydration, simple as water is or juices, through sweating, most people don't sweat, through respiration, which is activity, through exercise, and moving the blood, getting the lymphs pumping to get that river of life going instead of a stagnant swamp, like a stagnant pond, which attracts what? What does a stagnant swamp attract? Picture that. Bacteria, viruses, fungus, yeast, molds, mosquitoes, flies. That analogy is the human body also. When you have stagnation in an organ or a system with no lymphatic flow or no blood flow, what is that going to attract? Fungus, bacteria, viruses, fluke worms, parasites. These are scavengers that are cleaning up your mess because you didn't. These are secondary cleanup crews that are saying, hey, I gave you the opportunity to move the blood through exercise. I gave you the opportunity to open up the skin through a sauna or get outside and run and sweat. I gave you the opportunity to do something to open up your colon and your urinary tract through simple as water hydration, but you're not doing it. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to send my scavengers in, my bacteria, my viruses, my parasites, my fluke worms, and now you're going to have a secondary invasion. If you don't clean that mess up, then God's third mechanism of invasion of cleanup crew is mucus secretions. The mucosal cells start spitting out mucus, and the reason why they do that is it's a trapping of a spider web. It traps this stuff, and it pulls it into an elimination route, such as nose, runny nose. These are intelligent purging systems of a healing crisis. That's how simple it is. If you have a coughing of the lung, what's it trying to do? It's trying to cough up the mucus in the lung because you have bacterial and viral forms or parasites that are in the lung tissue, and creating the mucus, trapping it, pulling it up, and hoping you can cough it out, okay? If you have diarrhea, that's a toilet flush mechanism to get the stuff out of the colon. If you're sweating, that's the body's way of saying, look, you got so much bacteria and so much viral invasions that I have to create a heat now. A heat to kill off the viruses and move them into the skin through diaphoresis, and hopefully you'll get under a blanket and shiver and get under one to sweat to get the stuff out. Well, the ignorance of medicine is it's an unnecessary, unintelligent nuisance. Let's stop the cough. Let's stop up the runny nose. Let's stop up the fever. Let's stop up the diuretic stools. And in their ignorance, they just shove the disease deeper, right back into you. In fact, I'm going to show you something the Lord showed me. The very word of every drug, in every drug, tells you straight out, I'm going to go against God's self-healing mechanisms. I'm going to go against the autogenic systems. What's the word anti mean? Against. Anti-diuretics, anti antihistamines, antipsychotics, antidepressants, antihypertensives, anti-inflammatories, decongestants, protease inhibitors, calcium channel blockers, beta blockers. They're blocking your healing crisis. Now, what does that tell you? Is that of God? Okay? In the scriptures, it warns you of the pharmacia, the pharmaceutical industries. In Revelations 18, it says, by thy sorceries are all nations deceived. What's the deception? White coat, white trust, stethoscope around their neck. You drug it, you cut it, you burn it, you poison it. Who's telling these doctors to drug, cut, burn, and poison? I'm going to show you how far back it goes to help you understand that the drug industries run the doctors. The drug industries fuel billions and billions of dollars into Harvard, into Baylor, into Dartmouth, into all of the institutions. And what they do is they have an investment of billions of dollars of their own money. And how do they get the investment back out? Very simple. They mold their own professors and put them strategically into the universities. And that professor has the paycheck written by the drug companies, and they're telling them up-and-coming medical students that are hungry to learn the truth, you drug the symptom, you cut it, you burn it, you poison it. You drug it, you cut it, you burn it, you poison it. Where does the money go when that's taught? It goes right back to the drug industries, every which way but loose. Billions are being made by 750 employees of the drug company. That's what the doctors are. And I feel for the doctors, too. I want to stick up for them in this realm. Their hands are tied by bureaucratic tape. They can't write what they want. They can't do any diagnostics that they want because HMOs and PPOs and insurance companies are saying, I will cover this CPT code of this drug, but I will not cover this, this, and this. I will cover a mammography that causes breast cancer, but I won't cover a thermography or an ultrasound. That because we're not going to cover that because there's no CPT codes in our hospitals. So it's controlled as to what diagnostics they want and what pharmaceuticals to write. And they're using the doctors as legal script writers, and they're molding them into legal butchers because 80% of the surgeries out there are unnecessary. This is a blasphemy to the Lord. God made us self-heal. We self-heal. Every single cell of your body dies, replaces itself, except for brain and nerves. Some of those will never come back. So if you take the cells of the skin, they shed like a snake in 21 days, and you get a whole new dermis and epidermis in 21 days, 14 to 21. You get a whole new mucosal lining every 5 days. It sheds like a snake and comes right back. You get a whole new heart every 8, 9 months. You get a whole new spleen every 6, 7 months. You get a whole new red blood cells. It turns over every 90 days. You get a whole new skeletal structure every 7 to 10 years. You know, your bones even die off and replaced. They're a little bit harder because of the hardness of the calcium and the osteoclast and the osteoblast, but they eventually die off, and you get a whole new body every 7 to 10 years. Now, I said a whole new one. I didn't say a better one. I said a new one. There's a difference. If the cellular structure's previous generation was bathing in toxic sewage of Coca-Colas and Dr. Peppers and alcohol and preservatives and sugar, that cell dies and replaces a little bit weaker than before. If the sludge is still around the new cell and you don't clean it and don't detoxify, that cell dies and replaces a little bit weaker than before, and a little bit weaker than before, and a little bit weaker than before. Pretty soon at 40 years old, you're already 80 chronologically because the cells have degenerated instead of regenerated. Now, how you regenerate the cell is you give life force to the blood. When the blood is carrying life from living foods that are untouched by man from the processing and rendering plants, okay, and that blood is picking up fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains, seeds, living food, real food, then the blood is a river of life and transfers the life from the plant into your cell. And the cell lights up. It literally has microvoltage, and it lights up, and 75 trillion cells light up on 8 cylinders. When the 75 trillion cells that make up the organs and systems light up on 8 cylinders, you run on 8 cylinders. Simple. If the cells are coated and the microvoltage is inhibited, like putting carbon on a battery, and you have 75 trillion cells that are running on 2 cylinders, guess what you run on? 2 cylinders. So what's the symptoms that your body's going to tell you when you run on 2 cylinders? Headaches, nausea, tiredness, lethargic conditions, gut aches, skin reactions. The symptoms are a blinking oil light like in your car telling you got a cellular engine problem. So a medical doctor would look at that situation and say, I think it's the blinking oil light in my car and not the engine. I think it's the symptom that we need to knock out, not get to the cellular structure of the problem. That's what's happening in medicine. They're looking outside at the symptomology and not the physiology or the causative factors of cell. I'm going to say that again. It's cell, cell, cell. Wherever the cells are mutated, wherever the cells are damaged by the sludge accumulation, a deposit, is where the slapped-on label is going to give you, okay? That also correlates with pH, okay? If you have, and for those who don't know what pH is, it's power of hydrogen, and the human body is actually regulated on a perfect pH of alkalinity versus acidity. The body's blood has to be a thin window of 735 to 745 pH in order to have homeostasis or balance or health process with rejection of disease process, as long as the blood's clean and it's loaded with live nutrient. If the cell and tissues drop below 6.8, going to more acidity, you know, when you drop below 7, it's acid. When you go above 7, it's alkaline. The scale is 1 to 14. 14 is the most alkaline, and 1 is the most acidic. The body's regulatory authorities of everything from immunity to neurotransmitter release, to hormonal release, to your everything in the body, even digestive enzyme secretion, is regulated by a certain pH. So when you're running more acid pH, or you're running too alkaline past the 7.4, the body goes under adaptation response to try to buffer the blood and to get rid of these acid deposits that are creating the acid pH. How it does it, which is a danger to the body, is it will rob calcium and it'll rob alkaline minerals out of the bone, out of your teeth, out of your heart, and out of your soft tissue organs, robbing Peter to pay Paul, in order to buffer the blood to get it back up to a normal 7.3, 7.4. If the blood pH drops below 7, it's called metabolic acidosis, and you will go into a coma. At 6.9, you will die. That's how delicate the pH is. From 6.9 to 7.3, it either puts you in the grave or it'll bring health to you between 0.5% of pH. Here's the danger of these so-called Frankenstein foods out there and beverages. Most beverages, especially the carbonated, like your Cokes and Pepsi and Dr. Pepper, carry a 2.5 pH. And I'm going to show you how dangerous that is. When you have a 7 pH, which is neutral to the tissues, which is healthy, when you go from 7 to 6, it's 10 times more acidic than 7. 6 is 10 times. When you go from 6 to 5, it's 100 times more acidic than neutral 7. When you go from 5 to 4, it's 1,000 times more acidic than the neutral 7. It's exponential. When you go from 4 to 3, it's 10,000 times more acidic. When you go from 3 to 2, it's 100,000 times more acidic. So what's happening at a 2.5, you can imagine what the body has to do in order to neutralize one Coca-Cola. The answer to that is 32 glasses of high pH water it takes to neutralize one Coca-Cola or one Pepsi. And this is diet included, people. Doesn't matter. You still have phosphoric acid. You got carbonic acid. You have sugar acid. In that, it's a triple whammy, and then on top of that, they jolt your central nervous system and your adrenal glands with the caffeine on top of that. Plus, you're swallowing CO2. What is CO2 to the human body? It's waste. You breathe in O2 and you spit out what? CO2. All of a sudden you got a Coke in your hand with CO2 carbonated and you drink it back down and you burp. Why would you burp? Because the body's saying, what are you doing? You're sticking a waste product down my throat and I'm going to regurgitate it back up again. That's why you're burping, but people like that feeling. If you really knew what's doing to your body, you wouldn't drink a Coke again. And that's what I'm hoping to say, something out there to let you know the landmines of the Illuminatis. If you step on sugar, you're going to be taken out. Refined processed sugars. If you're going to be stepping on refined processed foods, God is not no respecter of person. You reap what you sow. If you sow dead, refined, processed foods, you sow death and disease. Simple. Life begets life, death begets death. You cannot get life from death. You can only get death from death, okay? Life has to have life, which is living foods, and when the cell is actually saturated with these dead, refined, processed foods that have no life, it creates what to the cell? It creates a reduced microvoltage, which is life. And eventually you'll manifest the sickness in that area. So hopefully that makes sense to you, the big picture. Instead of looking at trees, I'm going to show you the rainforest. That the 10,001 disease labels is the same disease. The only difference between an arthritic patient, the only difference between a cardiovascular patient, or a diabetic patient, or a cancer patient, or a cardiovascular, is the patient here that has heart disease, what was their target organ for the dump zone of the blood? It was their heart tissue. When the heart cells got accumulated, or the arterial lining or the blood vessels in and around the heart collected a bunch of sludge and the heart couldn't pump very well and you get arrhythmias, well, the fancy name on that is what? Either myocardial infarction or cardiovascular disease. If the patient is an arthritic patient, their dump zone was the joints, coating the synovial fluids, creating an autoimmune response there. If the patient had a liver cancer, the liver tissue was the target area of the attacks and the assaults to the cells of the liver. If you have dementia problems, the dump zone or the storage was the brain tissue, and so on it goes. So I want you to understand that there is no such thing as 10,001 diseases. That's the lie from a pit of hell. The reason why they do it, now think about why they would do that and perpetrate that to the MDs. What can they cause in the medical profession when that lie is perpetrated and bought by the medical students? Think about it. Mystery. Okay? When you don't solve the mystery, you don't solve the money. So they create this dangling carrot, give us more money and give us more time, and we will cure cancer, the war on cancer. We will cure autoimmune diseases, retroviruses, degenerative diseases. They're lying. Because time and money won't fix it because they're looking in the wrong direction. If you're looking to the right and the truth is to the left, you'll never find it. That's like being in a Ferrari driving 200 miles an hour. I'm sorry, a Volkswagen going 89 miles an hour in one direction, and then you never switch directions, but through technological advancements you can make that Volkswagen into a Ferrari engine and go 200. And you don't change directions, guess what's happening? You're going in the wrong direction faster, and that's what they're doing. Technology is killing us, not helping us, other than trauma medicine. I'm going to say that again. Our trauma medicine specialists, microsurgery, cauterization of a hemorrhage, if you get a broken bone, if you need a triple bi or a quad because of an emergency situation, yes, you go to a doctor. But when they have a toenail ache, or you have the common cold, or arthritis, or diabetes, you don't go to an MD, okay, because they can't fix you. You can't fix diabetes with Humulin insulin. It's a Band-Aid. You cannot fix cardiovascular disease with a cardiac med because it never gets to the root problem of the cellular structures being weakened in the heart. There is nothing in a pharmaceutical drug, nothing, I'm going to say that again, that the body can use. It's synthetic chemical concoctions that are carbon-based, petroleum-based constructs. I'm going to say that again. The human body, again, knows self from non-self. So when a synthetic concoction from a laboratory is put into your blood, that body looks at that chemical structure of the drug and says, where's the vitamins? Where's the enzymes? Where's the amino acids? Where's the carbohydrates? Where's the essential fatty acids? Where's the water molecule? Where's the oxygen? Where's the sunshine in that drug? That's what the body can use as a building block to the cell. It rejects it as a foreign substance, as a poison. Now, the chemistry of the drug will manipulate cell processes, but it will not modulate cell processes. I'm going to say that again. It manipulates the cell in order to speed it up or slow it down, on the consequence that when you manipulate one cell process, because the cells talk to each other, remember, like the fiber optic network analogy, it sends a signal of hurt and damage to 70 other trillion cells. So you manipulate one system over here and you threw off 4 more. That's where you get your side effects from. So they cannot use synthetic chemistry to manipulate one area without throwing off the homeostatic boat of 4 or 5 other systems, creating side effects. If it was exact science, like they say they are, it wouldn't have side effects. Okay? It's direct effects. There is no such thing as side effects. That's the pacification to the doctors, making them believe that side effects are a necessity for the treatment modalities. Okay? So you want to use natural methods that modulate. The cell can only be fixed by 10 categories of nutrients. That's proteins, carbohydrates, essential fatty acids, 16 vitamins, 72 minerals, trace, macro mineral, and also the micros. Now, I'll get into that later. Enzymes, life force, phytonutrients, which is the antioxidants, and they come from plant, water, oxygen, and sunshine. is another nutrient that I call. When those building material are in the blood and are carried to the cellular structures and bathing the cells, then you have perfect balance and homeostasis, and disease process can't set in that condition because the pH is perfect. When you have toxic residues and acid residues that are coming in from fried foods, from alcohol acid, from your sugar acid, carbonated beverages acid. Okay, I'm going to show you the acid column versus alkaline column. That's why people are getting sick. Pharmaceuticals, acid. Antibiotics, acid. I call them emotional toxins. Stress, acid. Anger, acid. Bitterness, acid. Okay? You have red meats, acid. Let's look at alkaline column. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, juices, fresh vegetable juices, water, sunshine, and oxygen. Oxygen is an alkalizer or an oxidator, okay? So God's column is here, and Satan or man's column is over here. It's perpetrating sickness. It is not a health care industry, it's a sick care industry. And they have to have sickness to perpetrate the industry. This is common sense. You cannot create health to a population and keep up the hospitals and keep up the doctors and the nurses and all of the economy that goes along with the business. Cancer Inc. and Disease Inc. They manifest sickness and disease purposely by doing these measures of manipulating pH, contaminating the blood, contaminating your cells, also making sure that the soil is just ruined. And again, when you have an agriculture expert, they're called agronomists, and they do not rotate the soil and use manure, and they don't measure the pH of the soil, what happens to the plant? The plant withers. It dies, okay? The reason why pests and insects are on the dead, withering plant is it's a scavenger. It's bringing it back to the dust of the ground where it belongs. It's dying, okay? When a human being's soil is acidic, and a soil analogy to the soil in the ground is your acidophilus, your bifidus, your salvarius, your planetarium. These are called your flora, your good bacteria that's in the gut. We live symbiotically with viruses, bacteria, fungal forms, with pathogens and microbes, but the symbiotic relationship is in the soil, in the gut, in the stomach, not in the blood and not playing in the organs. So what happens is when they create an acid condition to you, they just created a disease process instead of a health process because the acid pH invites the scavengers to come in. I'll use a metaphor to that. If you have a dirty kitchen with dishes in the sink, breadcrumbs on the floor, and honey on the counter, what's going to come into your kitchen in about 2 days? Cockroaches, ants, pathogens, okay, microbes. They're there for a reason, again, to clean up your mess. They're there to clean up the mess that you didn't. Medical doctors would look at that situation and go, I think it's the cockroaches and ants that are the problem, not the dirty dishes in the sink. So their solution would be to spray them with pesticides and insecticides and leave and say, we just fixed the problem. They leave the dishes in the sink and the breadcrumbs on the floor, okay? Medical science would then come in again after the cockroaches come back a week later, and the ants, and they spray them again, and they spray them again, and they spray them again, leaving the dishes in the sink. That metaphor is, if you leave your dirty dishes in the sink, meaning leave your toxins in the blood, you leave the toxic residues in your cells, you leave the liver and the kidney backed up, you leave your colon polluted, you leave your pH acidic, you leave the environment low oxygen, you leave the environment low nutritional, you invited the cockroaches and ants to come in. The bacteria and viruses and fungal forms and parasites and all of these pathogens that are virulent come in because of the dirty kitchen environment that you've created. What you eat, what you drink, what you breathe, emotions, and what you're bathing in. That's how simple it is. So when you create a strong cellular terrain, a strong cellular environment, I'm going to show you how to do that, you reject the pests. Just like if you cleaned up the dishes in the sink and the breadcrumbs on the floor, guess where the cockroaches go? You don't have to kill them, they go next door. And they search for another dirty kitchen. The pathogens can only take hold when you have a right cellular terrain that is necrotic and dead cells laying around, acid pH or too alkaline, when you have no circulation, stagnation to the cell, no circulation, when you have low oxygen environment, it's called hypoxia, and that's what causes cancer, hypoxic conditions. When you have 10 categories of nutrients that are missing at the cell level, And you have toxic residue that is suffocating the cell membrane. That's the cellular terrain that these pathogens love, including cancer. Okay? When you have high oxygen, I'm going to kind of switch gears here and show you how you would deal with that solution of that problem. You do a detoxification, meaning a full body flush. And with Crusader over there, they have products that are formulated for that reason, of cleaning up the blood, changing pH, of cleaning up the liver, the kidneys, and so forth. But you have to look at the sewage systems. I'm going to kind of get into solutions now in reference to the problem. Number one, if low oxygen is a problem, what would you do? You would increase your oxygenation. How would you do that? Number one, you would do deep breathing exercises. Or if you have access to a nasal cannula, if you're that blessed to do that, running like 2 liters of pure oxygen in would help compensate that. As simple as exercise is, because you're breathing faster and getting into air that is clean, such as in the mountains, okay, or somewhere where there's a lot of trees and greenery, to increase oxygen. Through technology, and there's products out there like Crusader that have a liquid oxygen that you can actually drink. You drop it in the water, and you can actually drink it to get it to the blood that way. If disease process loves acid pH, how do you fix that? Again, detoxification. You got to remove the acid residues by sweating, by defecating, by urinating, hydration. Water is a high alkaline component. As simple as water is, and that's 73% of our body's water. The body was actually invented to carry the water around. Okay, that's why you look at the structures again. CHON. Oxygen is the major element. I mean, oxygen in actual water is the major element of the building blocks. So, by purging or by eliminating the acids, by sweating, by urinating, by defecating faster than what you're doing, and by breathing through exercise, that's one factor of changing the pH to more alkaline. Number two is bringing in God's foods instead of man's Frankenstein acidic foods. Fruits. Now, some of them are subacid. Some of them are acid, but you need 20% acid in order to have a balance. 80% alkaline and 20% acid. And the 80% should come from your fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds, and then also water. Herbal teas is another alkalizing agent, and then fresh vegetable juices. And also, you can actually mix the vegetables and make cocktails to actually make an alkalizing green drink, and then use the green foods like a Perfect Food or Pro Greens. They just take a tablespoon and throw it right into the juice, and it kicks the pH up real fast by doing that. Because all of the alkalizing minerals are in the vegetables mainly, and then also in the fruits because of the calcium and the magnesium and the sodium and potassium. Those are the 4 macro minerals that are alkalizing. Okay? If disease process is also nutritional deficiencies, then you load the blood through digestion or drinking with the 90 plus nutrients from 10 different categories. Okay? And the 10 categories are, I'm going to run them down real quick. Amino acids, there's 22 of them, come from protein. Carbohydrates, you want the carbohydrates that are real food, not synthetic sugar carbohydrate. That's fruits, vegetables, and grains. Essential fatty acids, these are good fats. You need the good fats to build the phospholipid membranes, and you also need them for sex production of sex hormones. And most of the brain is built on lipid. So the essential fatty acids are crucial, especially during children from the time they're born to the time they're 2, 3 years old. They need the good fats to build the brain. And what Satan is doing, or the evil one, is he's trying to keep the children away from the EFAs by running Simulac, or running all these synthetic foods in these children, and Cokes and sugary soft drinks, and their brain never gets built, and they wonder why they're bouncing around off the wall with ADD and having problems with concentration. They haven't built up the brain in order to have cognitive thinking as far as homeostasis there. That's a big problem in this country with the children. In fact, what's the word Simulac? The reason why they call it Simulac is it's similar to milk and it lacks everything. That's why they call it Simulac. And there's so much garbage on the market that unless you're aware of the real foods, people shop by conveniency with a 2-for-1 coupon in their hand. Okay, they don't think what they're putting down their throat or what they're drinking. They think somehow the body's going to sift it up and separate the garbage and take in the nutrient and have no effect. okay? And the 2-for-1 is to the grave is what you got, because, you know, these people are thinking, well, if I go to organic foods, it costs more. I got to go out of my way, you know, to get organic foods at Whole Foods. It's actually not that much more expensive, but it will cost you. And you might be saving a little bit on the front end, maybe 5-10 grand in a 20-year period with the coupons, but then it's going to cost you a 34 grand surgery on the back end with a triple bypass, or a stroke, or a quadruple bypass. So you're not saving anything. So it is better to go out of your way. In the scriptures it says, wide is the gate that leads to destruction, and many thereof find it. That wide gate of conventional foods is a physical scripture, also the spiritual scripture. Narrow is the way, and few thereof find it, that leads to life. That narrow gate of Whole Foods and real foods is that narrow gate, and you need to be looking for it, because Satan he's smart. He has landmines everywhere, and he just hopes you step on them long enough, okay? And eventually you're going to be taken out. It's inevitable, and I don't want you guys to be a statistic to that. I want you to be around for the second coming, okay? Also, I'm going to touch base on something that's a real bad problem in this country, and it gets back to government genetic engineering. Number one is the GMOs, the genetically modified foods. Big problem, and I'll tell you why that's big. Number one, they're not telling you about it. They're hiding it. And Monsanto, thank them for that, with IG Farben, who runs that. And what they're doing is they're manipulating DNA. Now, DNA seeks its own. I'll tell you how dangerous that is. When you crossbreed, it's called transgenital mutants or recombinants. When you combine DNA from a fruit to a vegetable, or you crossbreed wheat and a corn, you're creating DNA that's foreign, that's never been on this earth before. And your DNA is attracted to DNA particles, whether they're foreign or whether they're living. And I'll show you kind of a correlation. When you take a glandular, like an adrenal glandular or a thyroid glandular, where does it go in your body? It goes right to your adrenals or right to your thyroid gland. When you take in a tomato that has been crossbreeded by a human gene because they want the tomato brighter and last longer for shelf life, that foreign DNA of a crossbreed of a human gene to a tomato, where do you think that's going to go in your body when you swallow it? It's going to insert itself, and it takes time. There's an incubation time for this. Number one, you're going to get an allergic reaction, which is going to cause allergies, which is big business for them, number one. Number two is eventually that foreign DNA, it gets in through the cell membrane of the cell that's weak, gets in through the nucleic membrane, and it sees the DNA and says, I want that strand. And it comes in like a scissors, and it snips out the DNA and replaces itself with the healthy DNA. And when the cell dies to replace itself to go forward to make a live cell, to, like a Morse code, print out LIVE cell, that little foreign DNA stops the process and says, I'm turning around and I'm printing out a EVIL cell, an evil cell, or a VILE, a vile cell. It doesn't make a live cell anymore, which means that it makes a mutated cell. And I have no idea what that mutated cell could be. Pick your disease, because that's what's going to happen. And they're not telling you about this. You know, at the greed and the expense of monopolization and trying to control the farmers through their terminator seeds, they're literally creating seeds that terminate after a year, so you have to buy another seed. It terminates life. What do you think it's going to do to you? I'm going to say that again. If it terminates life of the seed, what do you think it's going to do to you when you swallow it? I'm going to let you contemplate on that a little bit. And these are the things that they're not even talked about. And you guys better stand up and say something, because if we don't say something, they're going to continue to do it and continue to do it. And there's going to be more sickness, more plagues, more disease, and you're going to wonder why, and that's one of the problems, okay? Here's another one that's big. Mycoplasma. I don't know anybody that you know much about it. You guys, the sharper ones, the sharper remnant, 99.9% of the world has no clue what that is. Brucellosis, or brucella, and this is Don Scott's research, and Horowitz, who stumbled onto this about 4 or 5 years ago. They're taking brucellosis, or brucella, and they're extracting the DNA out of it. It's a bacterium. And now brucellosis is a non-virulent pathogen normally that lives in you. It's found in cattle and won't hurt you. But what they're doing is they're engineering into stealth viruses, and I call them designer genes, and it's not Calvin Klein. You know, they're literally designing the genes to, like an intracellular parasite, to actually attack and go inside the cell and hide. And when you do serological or cultures, blood cultures, nothing shows as far as abnormality. But they eat away at the genetic material inside the cell. So what they're doing is they're taking out the DNA of the brucellosis, the brucellia, and they're mutating it with a Visna virus, scabies, from sheep. And they're doing incubations and crossbreeding, and then they're using certain toxins in the DNA strands to engineer it to make no cell wall. Now this is I'll tell you how dangerous this is. When a DNA replicates DNA and replicates DNA from a crossbreed, which is a kind of a combination virus-bacterium because it has to attach to a host cell. It's not a bacteria, it's not a virus, it's like a mutant combination. It has to find a host cell with a cell wall in order to feed on because it has no cell wall. So it adheres like glue to the surface antigen, the membrane, and it eats away through the surface and eventually gets to intracellular and starts eating on the mitochondria and eating on the organelles inside the genetic material because it has an affinity or it needs cholesterol. Now, cholesterol structures in the body are the brain. Where do you think you're getting your Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease from? Where do you think you're getting your Parkinson's disease from? Where do you think you're getting your Alzheimer's disease from? It's a combination, like I said, with the toxic accumulation, which sets the stage. And then they're smart. The government's smart. God built their body so resilient that they know they got to weaken it through potentiators, and then they got to light the match with initiators in order to create the triggering mechanism. So they set the stage by weakening you with poison air, poison food, pharmaceuticals, poison beverages, cleaners, chemicals. They weaken the cellular terrain and lower the pH and knock out your immune system. So your potentiators, it's like pouring gasoline on a barn. And then they come with a match and light up the gas with trauma, with fear, with stress, with excess estrogen in women. That's a trigger. So there's initiators, which is the light, and then there's potentiators, which is the gasoline pouring on the barn every day. They got to have both in order for these disease process to be triggered. So getting back to the mycoplasma, they're making virulent strains, and here you're going to see 9 strains so far that I know of that are virulent, that are causing every disease known to man. Number 1 is called mycoplasmic fermentins. The word fermentins means fermentation. They're telling you what they're doing with it. They're causing fermentation diseases. What's a fermentation disease? Fungus, ferment. Cancer, ferment. Molds, yeasts, candidiasis. Look at the systemic candidiasis problems in this country. We've never had problems before. Okay? Another strain is called penetrans. The word penetrans means penetration. We're going to penetrate the cell membrane, and we're going to get inside the cell and use the organelles for food source, penetrans. That's another virulent strain. Number 3, hominous, homogeneous, crossbreed, homogeneous, hominous. Number 4, pyrum. Number 5, genitalium, genitalia. It's engineered to attack the actual tissues of the ovaries and the prostate. That's where you're getting so many problems there with the genitalium or the inflammation in the urethral areas. Another one is called pneumoniaea. The word pneumoniaea means pneumonia, upper respiratory infections. That's what it's prone for. So heart and lung is going to be the disease process. So what it does is the toxins and all of the acid residues first collect in your weak link, sets the stage, and then when they introduce the mycoplasmas, and the vectors are mosquitoes, that's why you're hearing this West Nile. The West Nile is mycoplasma, okay? But they have to label it a fancy name so you don't know what it is. It's packaged. In fact, all of these trash can labels, Huntington's, Parkinson's, okay? All these, fancy names of Hashimoto's disease, these are incognitus or incognito mycoplasmic virulent strains that are literally going inside the cell and hiding. And when you do serological or you do epidemiology, it won't show as far as abnormality. So it keeps them through a medical merry-go-round. Now I'll show you what's really the kicker. When a patient comes and sees a doctor who's a general practitioner, and this general practitioner has been compartmentalized, meaning that general practitioner knows very little about the other systems because he's a general practitioner. He is in med school to be a GP, okay? You have a neurologist that knows neurology but knows very little about endocrinology, okay? You have an endocrinologist who knows little about neurology and little about the gastrointestinal. So because mycoplasma affects all systems, you'll have symptoms in every system. You're bounced from one doctor to the next because they only know 1/9 of the systems. A gastrointestinal specialist only no stomach, but because it's a neurological problem too, you're to a neurologist. The neurologist will look at you and you give you meds for neurology and send you to an endocrinologist. And it's the gist medical merry-go-round. You end up seeing 10, 12, 13 doctors, and by the time they get done with you, because you're going to be labeled psychosomatic or a hypochondriac because they can't find it, now you're to a psychologist. And you're getting Prozac and Zoloft and so forth for your depression, because that's where they're going to label you. So, you know, that's the big problem out there. My time is up. Quick questions. I'm gonna ask 3 questions here, real quick, and we'll wrap it up. Absolutely. We have the pH strips. In fact, I'll be over at the booth over here at the Crusader booth. Any questions that are more lengthy, come on over to the booth, and we have a bunch of products and stuff that correlate with what I'm talking about, with the detox and the alkalizing of the pH to prevent these pathogens and these mycoplasmics from taking hold. You know, the good news is, I don't want to leave you hanging, is there's treatment modalities that can combat this stuff that the government's doing. Okay? And, you know, like I said, in more lengthy, I'll be over at the booth and I'll address those questions. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. It's called xenoestrogens. They're outside sources. And DES is another one. If you're a meat eater, you're eating DES secondhand, and DES is an estrogen, and it's a mimicker, and it actually kicks up the estrogen secondhand in the meat. Then you have antibiotics. You've got pesticides that are mimickers, insecticides mimickers, and a hormonal imbalance of the endocrine system is what triggers the mycoplasma. So they set the stage with potentiators, and then they light the match with the initiators. And you have to have 2. So, you know, if you remove the toxins and you clean up the cellular terrain, then you don't want to allow the mycoplasmas to take hold. And if you work on your stress and emotional traumas and things like that, you'll never get it. It's when you light up the match and you have the potentiators of the gasoline. And it has to have both. One more and we'll wrap it up. That's all. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, first of all, they know where to get treated. Okay, you notice that the suppression is the treatment modalities and the machines that are going to combat this. They know. They're smart. They think they got one up on us because they have longevity research. They know they know anti-aging technology. They know how to time travel now, and I don't have time to get into that, but they have the technology of autohemotherapy and Rife technology and so forth, that if they ever did get sick, they wouldn't be going to the mainstream medicine to get treated. They know better, okay? Also, they don't live in the United States, okay? You know, they'll pollute our territory, and then they're out here living up in the mountains somewhere, okay? So, you know, you're dealing with, and if they do come in, it's popping in, meeting, and popping out. So they're never here long enough to be exposed. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, I got to wrap it up here, and I'll be at the booth. Anybody wants a question?